Hello everyone and welcome back to DMG. Recently, I discussed the HP PhotoSmart 618, a competent point-and-shoot from the very early 2000s with an intriguing operating system under the hood, that being Flashpoint Digita. Now, today I'm looking at a camera that is in some ways very similar and in others extremely different. This is the Kodak DC220 Zoom from a few years earlier than the HP. It has very little in common on the hardware side. It has a different CPU, a different amount of memory, of course a completely different and far inferior image sensor, different optics, but it also runs DigitaOS. It runs an older version that looks very different, as you'll see, but it does the same basic things. So this is a look at Kodak's take on DigitaOS. Now if you haven't seen the first video, I highly recommend you go watch it because it gives some insight on what DigitaOS is and why it's so fascinating. But here's a quick rundown. DigitaOS was a unfortunately failed camera operating system launched in the mid to late 1990s. Only made it onto about 10 cameras before being discontinued right around the turn of the millennium, but it allows you to install your own software and write your own software for your camera, and that has never happened since DigitaOS went under. But here's the Kodak DC220. It's the DC220 Zoom in particular. Now right on the front here it says megapixel, and that's actually a lie. That's a scam. It's not 1 million pixels. It shoots at a resolution of 1152 by 864, and if you type that out, guess what? That's not 1 million pixels. I'm just kind of messing around there. Of course, megapixels aren't all that matter, but this is less than half of what the HP 618 can do. And also the sensor is a little bit smaller. It's closer to 1/3 frame. It's like an 11-something millimeter sensor. It's kind of tiny. Of course a CCD. Now it is the DC220 Zoom after all. It zooms about 2 times, but I will talk about why that's a bad idea in a second. This is a lower end model. This is the lowest end of Kodak's DigitaOS stack at the time. It went DC260, DC220, and eventually they launched a DC290, and that camera is a good deal, well, it's more powerful in the hardware sense and in the photography and optical sense. It is far better at taking pictures. But here is the DC220. Now, the DC220 on the front has the same IR transceiver system as the HP PhotoSmart, but what it lacks is an autofocus sensor. Because, well, this is called the DC220 Zoom, not the DC220 autofocus. Because it doesn't have autofocus. This is a fixed focus digital camera. You can't focus it at all. It doesn't even have manual focus. And unfortunately, its focus seems to be biased more towards the zoomed in side of the spectrum, but again, I will talk about all of this later. So just for now, quick overview. It looks very different from the HP. I mentioned that the HP 618 looks more like a film camera, aka a real camera, because, well, Pentax made it. Kodak was like, you know what, let's make the goofiest looking shit our engineers can put some circuit boards into. And that's what they did. They just built this ridiculous, goofy, silly-looking camera. It's actually ergonomically quite comfortable. It's the size of your whole hand, and the grips make it remarkably comfortable, more so than a camera like the 618, which only takes up half your palm. The Kodak fills your whole hand, and I do have rather large hands. If I had small hands, this would be uncomfortable, but it feels great because it's so large. You can't hold it with both hands, unfortunately, because, well, the lens is there. You could do that, I guess. On the back, it looks pretty different. It has the same assortment of buttons as the 618 because that is a requirement of DigitaOS to have a D-pad, the mode selector switch, 3 buttons under the screen, and display and menu keys. You won't find any DigitaOS camera without those. And on the top, it has a better LCD screen than the PhotoSmart 618 did. And let me demonstrate that to you real quick. That will require firing up our camera. So the top LCD screen of the Kodak DC220 has these scroll and select keys, which allow you to change a lot of settings without even have the main power-consuming, super power-hungry hot display turned on. So you can scroll through, turn your flash to on, red eye, or off, adjust your exposure compensation straight from this tiny screen, do still, burst, or time-lapse, and then change your quality. Good, better, and best. That looks like 6 UD. Good, better, and best. And that's how it all works. Of course, this display has room for 5 characters there that can be displayed at a time, which is fantastic. Really makes this screen less necessary. But there's the display of the DC220. It is noticeably lower resolution than the PhotoSmart 618. Now, it does have a speaker, and it does play sounds as you go through the menu. But I'm going to demonstrate the reason why you don't want to do that. I'll go into the capture menu. I currently have sounds off. I will turn system sounds on, and then I'll go and change some settings. Look how slow and unresponsive that is. I'll go back to this menu and disable system sounds. And now look at how speedy and fast and rapid the UI is. It instantly responds to those button presses. So that's just a demonstration of how bad the CPU in the DC220 is. It's very weak to the point where it is significantly slowed down by the sounds of buttons being pressed. But let's look at this menu some more. It's a bit more basic than the PhotoSmart. You can turn the white balance off for some reason. I don't know how that works and why it's called off. You can do programmed AE or long time exposure, which is fantastic. The PhotoSmart actually can't do super long exposure, but what this can't do is change ISO and, of course, focus. And you can't do like center or average. You can't set spot metering. It's just very basic. Can't change your ISO, exposure, iris, any of that. But let's check it out. Camera info. So, of course, this is the DC220 from Kodak Digital Science. Now, this is pretty well used. It's up there, 9187 shutter count. So it's been a lot of places, clearly. Now, free RAM, this is when things start to get a little sad. It has 4 megabytes of free RAM, that's 4.2 megabytes specifically, while the PhotoSmart 618 had 12 megabytes of free RAM. So that's just another way that the DC220 kind of loses out to the PhotoSmart 618, and now I realize that this low-end camera is not a great comparison. What it also can't run is my Ruler Mark II. And I've put a warning here that it can run on anything but the DC220 because it doesn't have autofocus. And you know what else it can't run? Let's throw it over in review mode and we'll hit menu and load that Doom software. You just saw the menus look pretty different than on the PhotoSmart, just visually, like the icons are different, but the system works the same. You see that? It didn't run Doom. This camera runs out of RAM. Doom needs more than 4 megabytes of free RAM to run. So when trying to load, it crashes out and goes back to DigitaOS. What this can run, though, I'll pop out this card and put this program on there real quick, is a Tetris port. Alright, I've loaded a Tetris port onto our wonderful compact flash card, and now I think when I go to menu, I'll be able to load that up. Yep, tetris.cam. So camera will shut down, and then when it powers back up, Tetris. So of course you just heard the speaker there. The speaker on the DC220 is a lot more enthusiastic. It's a lot louder. I'm sorry, these viewing angles are so bad. I'll need to tilt it a bit my way to even see what's going on at all. There you go. So it's Tetris, and it's a very competent Tetris port, and even on the slow DC220, it runs fine. One final piece of software I wrote, and this is kind of all culminating to the point that the CPU is slow. We'll reboot in capture mode, head into our menu, and then run this last piece of software. Flashmark, the first and only digital camera CPU benchmark. Now, I mentioned last video, or well, last DigitaOS video, that I was writing a software that needed a 20-second timer. 37 flash points, keep that score in mind. I mentioned last video that I was writing a software that needed a 20-second timer, and that was difficult with DigitaScript. This is the software that needs the 20-second timer. It resets the camera's clock to 00000, and it runs a benchmark. And the benchmark is seeing how many numbers it can count over a 20-second interval, which is 14 seconds because of the discrepancy in how the camera meters time. You're already seeing those numbers scroll a whole lot faster than the DC220, and within half the time of the benchmark, it's already surpassed the score of 37. Let's see, and 93 flash points, almost 100. That is... well, it's not quite 3 times the speed, but it's getting close to 3 times the speed. So, yes, that to say, the PhotoSmart 618 is 3 times as fast as the DC220. It has 3 times as much RAM. The CPU is nearly 3 times as fast. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like the camera being pretty slow to process photos. Now, it has a buffer, and that 4 megabytes of internal memory is included within that buffer. But you take a photo, and then you take another photo, and then eventually, after just 2 photos, it says processing pictures, and then you have to wait a while it compresses the JPEGs and then dumps them to the card. This was never a problem on the PhotoSmart 618, which had enough RAM and CPU power to do this in the background while you were shooting new photos. But it is a problem on the Kodak DC220, which has little RAM and a weak CPU, so it interrupts your photo shoot, so it can, of course, save your pictures to its card. We'll look at some of these pictures later, and I'll show you and tell you what I think of them. But yes, as demonstrated through my benchmark, I was so suspicious that the CPU is so much slower by just using this camera, by seeing it buffer for a while, and from just scrolling through its slow UI, I was so suspicious that the CPU was terrible that I ended up writing that benchmark, and it indeed has confirmed that the 823 processor is bad. Well, I don't want to leave off on CPU is terrible, so we're going to look at some of the photos, because it does have some areas where it excels. Time lapses are pretty good. Unfortunately, because of that long processing time, the minimum time-lapse interval is now 1 minute instead of 15 seconds. If it were to take a photo every 15 seconds, it would not be able to keep up on a high quality of photos. So it has to be a slower interval so that the camera can handle it. Another area in which it fails is the zoom. It does not take acceptable pictures at wide angles. Now, acceptable / unacceptable is a word I do not use lightly, but this, and this, and this is not good. The sensor is capable of more. It's just so out of focus because at the wide angle lens position, it's awful. And let me show you what it does look like zoomed in. That is so much better. This camera should only be used fully zoomed in, or at the least like 70% zoomed in, so that it's not crazy out of focus. Its even smaller sensor struggles even more than the PhotoSmart 618 at low light performance, but all early 2000s cameras, or actually no, this is a late 90s camera, all late 90s cameras did suffer from tragic low light performance, so I can't blame it too much there. Flash is very bright, it is exceptionally effective. Now, I did kind of complain about the time-lapse interval, but this does one aspect of time-lapse so much better. Now, when you're doing time-lapse on the HP PhotoSmart, wherever the hell I put it, when you're doing time-lapse on the PhotoSmart 618, the display stays on, and there is no way to turn it off. While on the DC220, you can turn off the screen while you're doing a time-lapse. So that means the HP lasts on 2800 milliamp hour nickel metal hydride batteries, it lasts about 2 hours of a time-lapse. The Kodak can go for well over 6 hours on the same battery doing a time-lapse because the screen isn't on the whole time. So that is just wonderful. That is so much better of a design decision to turn the screen off, and I don't know why HP didn't do that. Here are a couple time lapses that I've shot with it because, well, I'm proud of them. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the Kodak DC220. It's a bit of a shorter video because this is a bit of a inferior camera. Now, I'm not trying to just belittle the hell out of it because this is intended, well, this was intended as a lower end model. And it's so neat that even on a lower end model, it still runs DigitaOS. However, the painfully slow CPU and unfortunate lack of RAM make it a poor decision if you want to run DigitaOS software, like Doom, for example. And just using any software on it is a bit unpleasant, as is taking photos, just because of the processing and also because of the whole zoom thing. Really, you shouldn't zoom on it. You should leave it fully zoomed in because wide angle is blurry, as we pointed out. So I've liked taking a look at the DC220. It's been interesting to see what an older DigitaOS camera looks like, and it does some things very well, like that top display where you can change a lot more settings than on the HP, or particularly the time-lapse mode that allows you to turn the screen off. So those things are so much nicer. However, I just wish that it at least could just run more things, because so many of the softwares for Digita compiled for Kodak cameras are for the DC260, and now I understand why. It's because the DC220 can barely run its own user interface. Now, for a low-end camera, it performs okay, but I have a feeling the whole Digita thing, you know, because it needs a 16-bit CPU and all, I have a feeling that drove up the cost and made this pretty unpopular compared to, well, the same sensor that you could get in a different brand of camera for significantly cheaper, because you weren't paying for a CPU and RAM that couldn't really run anything. But that's going to wrap it up for the Kodak DC220. I have a lot more weird camera reviews coming, so if you're interested, do stay tuned. But that's it for this one, so thank you everyone for watching. I hope you'll go back and watch my HP PhotoSmart 618 video if you have not already, but that's a different video. So this one, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope you'll come back next time.